Good morning, everyone. Um, Welcome to today's special lecture by Dr. Lakshman Kumar Behra. Dr. Behra had joined the IDSA, or presently the Manohar Parrikar IDSA, in September 2006. He was there till September 2020 at the IDSA itself. He specializes on issues related to arms procurement, defense offsets, defense industry, military spending, and export control. Dr. Behra has authored numerous policy relevant research publications. His book, Indian Defense Industry: An Agenda for Making in India, which is also there in our library, provides a comprehensive analysis of India's evolving arms manufacturing sector. Dr. Behra has given numerous talks on defense, security, and finance related issues in prestigious training and academic institutes, including the College of Defense Management, National Academy of Defense Production, National Institute of Financial Management, and Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Dr. Behra was closely associated with several high-level committees set up by the Ministry of Defense to examine defense acquisition and defense expenditure. He worked as a consultant to the Task Force on Defense Modernization and Self-Reliance, constituted by the National Security Council Secretariat. The report presented to the Prime Minister had been the basis for several reforms carried through the defense procurement procedures, which is also called as the DPP. He has been a part of 3 IDSA study teams that prepared reports for the 7th Central Pay Commission, Expenditure Management Commission, Ministry of Finance, and Director General Acquisition of the Ministry of Defense itself. You might have come across a lot of his works, including in 2020, when the Prime Minister started certain very, very important programs, including Atmanirbhar Bharat. He had written a series of articles on that one, which were titled as Atmanirbhar through arms import ban, Atmanirbhar through canteen sales, defense technology, estimating India's defense manpower, then Bang for Buck, India's defense expenditure in wider perspective, refining draft defense offset guidelines 2022. Lot of on all the DPPs. In fact, he has worked extensively, which is something that we have also read for a very long time. We have been reading his works. And some of his other very interesting works have been the Indian defense economy, planning, budgeting, industry, and procurement, Routledge, that is 2021, Indian defense industry, an agenda for making in India. That's a 2016 Pentagon published work. And then we have the defense offset, international best practices and lessons for India. That's a monograph that came in 2015. So it's been excellent. Now, presently, Dr. Behra is an associate professor at the Special Center for National Security Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and it's indeed our pleasure to have Dr. Behra today, someone who is a pioneer in this particular area, to speak to our students. It's an extreme privilege that we see here, and perhaps this is the first time Dr. Lakshman Behra is also speaking or interacting with the students of Department of Geopolitics and International Relations. We thought should certainly bring him in, and he was kind enough to accept our invitation. So special thanks to you, Dr. Behra, and over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Nandkishore, for that kind and generous introduction. I'm so glad that some of my works have been noticed by others, and I'm glad that you have a special department on geopolitics and international relations. We in the National Security Center also looking at geopolitics and how it is impacting the national security. Well, this is a double pleasure for me because I'm talking for the first time to the students of Manipal Academy of Higher Education, and and I'm talking on the subject which, as Dr. Nandkishore was saying, I have put in some effort for some time now, and I hope I can part with some of my research findings, some of my knowledge with the students who I hope some of you are looking at this subject. I know this subject is little technical and not much information is in the public domain except the DPP, but I hope my lecture would help you in some respect. Well, I would start by thanking Dr. Nandkishore and his Department of Geopolitics and International Relations of Manipal Academy of Higher Education for giving me this opportunity. Without wasting any more time, let's go back to the subject directly. Well, I have been asked to speak on defense procurement procedure and defense offset policy of India. As I was saying, this is very interesting subject, although not much information is not in the public domain beyond the official documents. Let's look at some of the key aspects, key issues affecting India's defense procurement and India's offset policy. Well, before I go into the subject, into the details, let's look at the same. Let's look at the very simple question: why do we need some procedures for defense procurement? I think, to my mind, there are several reasons why we need a set of procedures to guide defense procurement. And the first point that comes to my mind is that when defense procurement is involved, it involves a lot of money. It involves a lot of taxpayers' money, and since the government is using the taxpayers' money for some purpose, so there has to be certain criteria which needs to be followed by every government. And those three criteria are probity, transparency, and integrity, and these are the hallmark of any government spending. So it is not limited to the Ministry of Defense or the defense procurement. Wherever there is a government money involved, public taxpayers' money involved. So these aspects are always adhered to by the government. Although we can't say 100% that all the time the transparency, probity, and integrity is adhered to. But nonetheless, that is the ambition or the objective of government, that the taxpayers' money should be spent in a thorough, transparent manner. Now, when it comes to defense procurement, I think defense procurement is little unique, little different from the procurement from other procurements. When I say other procurements, I mean the commercial procurement. So there is a big difference between defense procurement and commercial procurement. The biggest uniqueness of defense procurement is that it involves security and status of the country. Now, unlike the government buying some commercial items, be it some railway wagons or railway engines or commercial aircraft, defense equipment is involves the security or safety of the country. We can't just buy anything from anywhere, because if we are not so confident about that country, then generally we don't buy. Like India doesn't buy defense equipment from Pakistan and China for obvious reasons, and not that every country wants to sell you whatever you want to buy. It's like if India wants to buy a nuclear submarine, there are not many players in the international market except for Russia. Nobody would probably give you a nuclear submarine because of a variety of reasons. And it is also involved, the defense procurement also involves the status of the country. Like if it is a big country, large country, and wants some influence in the international system, then it must have a strong defense industry and a strong defense procurement mechanism. So unfortunately, we are a large country. We have a large defense budget, but unfortunately, we have not actually created a defense industry which can actually befit our status or our size. So that's a different story. But generally, the big countries influencing countries with big influence in the international system, they have developed a strong procurement system which actually gives impetus to their defense industry. And defense procurement is also unique because it involves few players. Like if you go to the market to buy a refrigerator or a air conditioner, you will probably be flooded with choices. So there will be minimum 5-7 choices to choose from. But in defense, all the time, not many players are there for any given product. Suppose we want a fighter aircraft with a ground attack role. So probably we'll have maximum 1 or 2 players who are actually manufacturing that type of aircraft, which suits your requirement. So if there are few players, then obviously there are other complications which come into play, so that the government and a set of procedures would really take care of it. And the third aspect is that defense procurement involves a lot of money. It involves public money, but it involves a lot of public money. So like I have given the procurement budget for 21-22, that is the current financial year. So you can see for the 3 services, the government has earmarked over 1,11,000 crore rupees. So which is quite big. In fact, if you look at the world or the major spenders, except for the US and China, so India is probably the third largest spender on defense equipment. So anyway, so India is the third largest defense spender after US and China. So obviously its procurement budget has to be third largest, and we are spending quite a lot of money. So if we are spending a lot of money, so obviously, so the taxpayers or the public wants to know whether that money has actually been spent judiciously and for the purpose and for the right purpose. So that's why only a set of procedures will guide the public authorities to spend on the right areas. Then defense procurement involves long gestation period. It's unlike you buying a mobile phone, you go to the shop or a mall and next half an hour you buy your product. In defense, the procurement part, that means the contracting part, itself takes 2 to 3 years. By the time you open a tender, you float a tender and you close the contract by signing the contract takes 2 to 3 years. And if you include the delivery period, which for big items may take 6-7 years, like Rafale contract. So it was signed, I think, if I am not mistaken, in 2016, but all the deliveries have not been completed. So the last one will be delivered by 2022, if I am not mistaken. So delivery takes its own sweet time, but the contracting period itself is 2 to 3 years. So unlike in other areas, so in other areas, maybe you can get your stops. You can sign the contract, get the item delivered within 6 months time all total. But here the time we are talking about is quite long, and that means if you are not following a predefined procedures, so then there is a risk that somebody or the vendor or the buyer, they may back out from the contract by citing some reasons or the other. So the procedures have to be robust enough to bind both the parties, both the buyers and sellers, to a predefined agreed points. Defense procurement involves meticulous planning because, as I was saying, that if you are buying something which will be inducted 5 to 7 years later, then your planning should be such that that by the time the equipment arrives, it's not obsolete, it's not out of fashion. So that means you have to plan in such a way, and then your planning mechanism needs to support it, needs to support the procedures, or the procedures need to support your planning mechanism in such a way that you get the right capability from the equipment that the government is buying or the armed forces are buying. Then defense procurement also decides the future of industry in 2 ways. Now defense procurement, like when we are the Indian armed forces are trying to buy something, they can either buy from India or they can buy from abroad. So that means if we are buying from abroad, that means our local industry is losing out from that money. That money is going out of the country to a foreign country or a foreign company. That means it's not helping our industry. So it all depends. So that is why the whole focus of the present government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi is to make here, not to buy from abroad, but try to make in India through the participation of local industry. So this buy and make decision is very crucial to decide the future of industry. So buy has always been, if you look at India's, I will show you in subsequent slides also. Most of the time we have been quite happy in importing defense equipment from other countries for a variety of reasons. It's not that we could not make, we have made so many defense equipment. If you have read today's newspaper, so we have further modified the Agni series of missiles. Now this is canisterized. You can put the missile in a cell and you can fire it. And it is rail and road mobile. And because we put in efforts, our industry, our R&D entities work consistently, and we have a capable platform. But the same is not actually true for many other conventional items. So for small things, recently only there was a news report saying that we are importing cloth, this high altitude cloths for the armed forces from countries like Sri Lanka. I mean, could you imagine that India importing uniforms or special uniforms from countries like Sri Lanka, and Indian companies are not able to manufacture? I mean, it's difficult to fathom with. So that is why the future of the defense industry is related to what decision you take, the government or the armed forces take, buy or make. If it is make, then obviously we can make a lot of things for the armed forces, and we could truly become self-reliant. Well, since we are talking about the procedures keep on changing. In fact, I have given you the cover of the last two procedures that we had. So on the left side, you can see on the bottom DPP 2016. So it is the defense procurement procedure which was released in 2016. I think that time Mr. Parikar was the defense minister. And now these procedures keep on changing. The government tried to modify, streamline certain aspects, and then we have the latest one. Interestingly, for the first time since I think since 2002, the name has been changed. Now the name has been changed to Defense Acquisition Procedure. From the DPP, now it is DAP, from procurement to acquisition. There is a valid reason. There is a big difference between procurement and acquisition. But there are some semantics. I am not going into that those details. Those who want to know more, so there are enough articles written, so you can have a look at that. But in the last iterations, the name has changed to Defense Acquisition Procedure 2020. And you can see that Atmanirbhar Bharat, so that is the motto of the Modi government. So there is a strong focus of defense procurement to promote local industry, the indigenous aspect. So you can see the Atmanirbhar Bharat figuring in a very prominently on the cover of the DAP. Now these procedures, as I was saying, has been streamlined several times. There is a brief history to the procurement procedure. The first procedure was actually was announced in 1992, although this was a classified document. This was an internal document prepared by the ministry, which was never released in the public domain. But subsequently, all the other procedures which were announced by the government were put in the public domain. Now, since 1992 to 2002, there was no revision. So, since that it was not known to the outside people, so government people didn't know what was happening to the defense procurement. And so, when the Kargil happened, there was a group of ministers which was constituted, and that group of ministers found during its deliberation that the procurement is actually not keeping pace with the security requirements of the country. And then the group of ministers highlighted that we need to constantly streamline the procedures so that all the hurdles were eliminated and when we face them. And that is how the first public version of DPP came in 2002. And at the same time, the government also created a new procurement organization, which you can see on the slide. So this is a multi-tiered acquisition organization being headed by the Defense Acquisition Council, DAC, which is chaired by the Defense Minister himself, and all the top leadership of the Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces are represented in the DAC. So this is the ultimate decision-making body in the Ministry of Defense when it comes to defense procurement. Under the DAC, there are Defense Procurement Board, Defense Products Procurement Board, Defense Production Board, Defense R&D Board. But for the procurement purpose, the office which is critical, which does the maximum job, is the Office of Director General Acquisition, or in short we call it DG Acquisition. So he is supported by FA Acquisition, Financial Advisor Acquisition. There is a land system, there is an air division, there is a maritime division, there is a system division who actually support the DG Acquisition in acquiring defense equipment for the armed forces. Now you can see from 2002 to 2020, almost 10 times the DPP has been revised. 2003, 5, 6, 8, 11, 13 DPP we played some role. there was a committee constituted in the National Security Council to look at why India is buying so many stuffs from, importing so many stuffs from outside, and based on deliberations gave a report to the government, and the government accepted few recommendations, and those were incorporated in the DPP 2013. DPP 2016 was realigned or streamlined so as to reflect the Make in India initiative, which was launched by the Prime Minister Modi in September 2014. So because Prime Minister Modi, when he came for the first time, he gave a big slogan that India should be a manufacturing hub. So that slogan actually reverberated in all the government departments, including the Ministry of Defence, and Ministry of Defence also tried to modify its procedure, the procurement procedure, to give an importance to the Make in India. So after that, some modifications were carried in 2017 when the strategic partnership model was announced. I will talk about it. There is some queries during the QA time. But I must say that the strategic partnership model has not actually seen the light in terms of fructification of certain projects, but there is a big potential of it to transform the Indian defence industry, particularly the private sector. And now, as I was saying, in 2020, so the DPP was revised again, and the new document came, which is called Defence Acquisition Procedure. The name was changed, and with the change of name, certain other aspects were also changed, which I will talk about in subsequent slides. Now, since we have a document, Defence Procurement Procedure or Defence Acquisition Procedure, so the basic aspect that people look at it is what are the objectives of the acquisition, because we have such a huge document. In fact, if you look at the history, the timelines or the DPPs, the first DPP, public version DPP, which was released in 2002, was hardly 100 pages, less than 100 pages. So in 2002, but now if you look at the new document, now this document is released in 2 volumes, so around 660 pages. So in terms of pages, it is grown by more than 6 times. Of course, I'm not saying that whether this is enough or this is too much. There are some people who say, oh, our procedures are too complex. Some say our procedures are not defined. So jury is still out whether the DPP more pages are actually good or not good.
There are 3 objectives, and I'm really sorry for all these inconvenience. Yeah. So 3 objectives. So the second objective is to ensure the aspects of probity, public accountability, transparency, fair competition, and level playing field. And this is quite obvious because defence acquisition involves public money, taxpayers' money. So all these transparency aspects need to be added to. And but the third aspect or the third objective is quite important. That is, so the government of late is trying, particularly the Modi government, when it came to power for the first time in 2014, has ensured that self-reliance, keeping in view Make India and now the Atmanirbhar Bharat mission needs to be imbibed in all the government documents. And since the Ministry of Defence spends a lot of money, in fact, the biggest chunk of government money on procurement is done by the Ministry of Defence. So that self-reliance aspect is quite emphasized in the acquisition. Yes. So as I was saying, so the DPP, or which is now the DAP, has been changed quite often, and now there are, if you look at the content, the chapters. So in fact, with every new iterations or every changes in the document, we see some new chapters coming up. And in the latest revision, which was done last year, we saw that how many 5 new chapters have been incorporated in the new document. So all the new chapters which you can see in blue color, chapter 4, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, and chapter 11, these were the new additions in the document. And the government And some is quite justifiable because government of late is buying a lot of ICT systems, internet and communication technologies. So the normal procedures which we apply for defense equipments or the platforms are not applicable for the IT systems. That's a new chapter has been included. One chapter which is quite interesting and which is being talked about quite frequently is leasing. So whether and that has been now captured in the document. Leasing means instead of buying the equipment and owning the equipment, instead of that, the armed forces are now allowed to lease equipment from other countries, and after using it, the equipment or the platform can be returned. So next slide, please. So when we talk about defense acquisition, so keeping the objectives in mind, so the government has actually tinkered certain key aspects of the procurement, which I think needs to be known by everybody. And so there are three aspects. So when we buy, when we procure, or when we acquire a defense equipment, there are different modes or categories through which a defense equipment can be bought. And since the government is talking about self-reliance, so self-reliance can only happen if there is a mandatory indigenous content requirement, indigenization requirement. And if the defense procurement has to give importance or primacy to the local industry, then the Indian companies have to play a major role in the procurement. So these are the three key aspects. So what is the mode of procurement? What is the level of indigenization content? And what is the level of participation of Indian companies? So these are the three, I think, broad aspects which actually decide the self-reliance and also the procurement in a fast, expeditious manner. Now, over the years, the government has come out with prioritized categories. Prioritized categories means the first priority is given, like you can see there are 7 categories in the second column, left from second column from left. So buy Indian IDDM, buy Indian, buy Make Indian, buy global, manufacture in India, buy global, lease, strategic partnership. So these categories actually are important for the localization purpose. So the government cannot go to the second prioritized category unless the first prioritized category is exhausted. And first prioritized category is much more friendly to the indigenous industry than the second one. Then second is much more friendly to the local industry than the third one. So this is how it goes. So the priority is local industry, and the priority is for greater indigenization. And indigenization can be through greater level of manufacturing, indigenous manufacturing, or indigenization could be through a combination of design and manufacturing. So that's why you can see buy Indian IDDM, the indigenous content is more than 50%, but there is an emphasis on indigenous design. And obviously the participant here is the supplier has to be an Indian company, not foreign company. And you can see over the years, India's defense procurement, the reliance on foreign companies are actually reliance, the dependency is slowly going down. I'm not saying that the dependency is totally gone. There is still a big dependency on the foreign companies, but nonetheless, government is trying, successive governments have tried to reduce dependence on foreign companies and to increase dependence on the local companies or Indian companies, including the private sector also. Next one, please. Now, defense procurement is quite complex. So as I was suggesting and indirectly that now you can just imagine from the number of pages from the DPP. So when it started with 100 pages. Now it is almost 650 pages, and so you can understand why the number of pages has increased, and it's primarily because of the elaboration of all the stages of procurement. And if you look at the stages, there are a number of stages. So in fact, there are 13 stages before which through which equipment purchase plan has to go through, starting with the request for information. That means you seek information from the local market or from foreign companies. Then you go through different stages till you sign the contract at number 12 stage. So award of contract. And then after you sign the contract, then there are also post-contract management. And in between, there are a lot more stages involved. Formulation of services, qualitative requirements. Those who want to know more, you can have a look at it in the DPP, but I'll just give a broad overview of all these stages. So out of these 13 stages, there are 2-3 stages which are very important. One is your qualitative requirements, which is numbered here at second stage. Formulation of services, qualitative requirements. So this is nothing but how the armed forces actually specify the requirement of an equipment system. If the armed forces, let's say, army is trying to buy an artillery gun or a tank, so so the army could easily say, okay, I want a tank which is 60 ton. Army can also say that, okay, I need a tank which is 50 ton. I need a tank which can run at 60 km per hour or 70 km per hour. These are the technical requirements, technical specifications. So these technical specifications play a vital role in deciding the purchase of equipment from Indian companies or the foreign companies. If the requirement or the specifications are too stringent, obviously it's not Indian company, defense companies being not so advanced or sophisticated cannot manufacture, supply those equipment, and then we have to depend on foreign companies. So that is why services, the SQR, services quality requirements, have played a major role. And in fact, some critics say that we prepare the QRs or SQRs in such a way that only the foreign companies can participate, Indian companies cannot participate, and that's why we have not actually given enough attention to the local companies. Now, another key aspect of the stage of procurement is your number 5 evaluation. 7 field evaluation trial. Now, when we invite so many players, both Indian companies and foreign companies, the ultimate test of their equipment is through the trials, demonstration. So we invite them for the trials, and then we evaluate which is actually meeting our requirement. But somehow we have not been very transparent in evaluation trials, and there are a lot of accusations that some vendors have been favored, some are not favored. So, and the government, successive governments, also Ministry of Defense, or the officials have tried to streamline the acquisition trial, and some steps have been done. But I think these are the critical aspects of which actually either delay the procurement or then the subsequent controversies come up. Even those, even some of the controversies that we saw in Rafale are also related to how the QRs were prepared and how the trial evaluation was done. So out of this 13, I think these are the 2-3 stages which are very important. And so if those aspects are taken care of, then the procurement can go smoothly in all the stages of procurement. Next slide, please. Yeah, next. Yeah. So having said that, I would say that whether so your question, you would ask the question whether how far we have actually succeeded in procurement. So I would say to me, I mean, I'm a keen observer of defense industry. Since one of the key objectives of the defense procurement is to provide incentive to the local industry for greater indigenization. I always look at whether indigenization has actually moved ahead or not. This slide you can infer that okay, our indigenization is around 60-65%, although there is no consistent pattern. Sometimes it's 60, sometimes it went down to 47% in some year. Now it is 68%. But this doesn't actually give the complete picture. It only says that of a total budget, procurement budget, how much we are actually spending spending on the local industry and how much we are spending on the foreign companies. Now, whatever we are spending on the local industry are not necessarily indigenous, because whatever contract we give to our local companies, they in turn buy a lot of stuffs from foreign companies. So there is a lot of indirect import involved in our domestic procurement. So if you take that, then our we have calculated we have estimated some figures, and our figure is around 40 to 45%. So that means only 40 to 45% of our procurement budget is truly staying inside India, and rest 60 to 65% actually going abroad. So we are not actually quite self-sufficient. In fact, our target was to achieve 70%, but after long and we are supposed to actually achieve that by 2005 or something. But till 2020, we have not achieved 70%. It is around 40 to 45%. So indigenization has actually not progressed, and that objective has actually has remained largely unmet. Next one, please. And this slide actually shows our dependency on foreign suppliers. You can see through various decades. So how our dependence on other countries has actually changed. Initially, it was UK, but I think after 1960s, it became the USSR, and after 90s, after its breakup, it became Russia, the predominant supplier. And I think after the Cold War, there are two, three players who have actually come up very fast. One is Israel, second is US, and third is France. You can see that in the table below in terms of percentage. So like US share has actually gone up to 10% from around 0% in 1970s. So there is a huge change in US as a supplier of arms equipment to the Indian Armed Forces. So our dependency has actually remained almost same, but the source of supply has kept on changing. Earlier it was UK, Russia. Russia is still there, but new players are actually coming up in terms of Israel and US in particular. Next one, please. Yes. So if you remember, so when the first NDA government came to power in 2001, during the Vajpayee's time, there was a key reform measure which was announced in 2001. That is allowing the private sector in defense production. And now, how many years? More than 20 years have actually passed. But if you look at the contribution of the private sector to our defense procurement, it has remained quite marginal. So you can see. I have some figures from 2017-18 to 2019-20. So you can see that only private sector in terms of value has contributed only 4% to our procurement, and so majority are either foreign coming from foreign sources or from the government companies. Like during these 3 years, 49% came from foreign sources and 47% came from the government-owned companies, but the private sector has contributed only 4%. So one of the sub-objectives, I would rather say, of the defense procurement is to promote Indian private sector's interest or their involvement. But I think their involvement has largely remained within the paper. So on ground, on reality, they have not actually contributed much, and I think it will take some more time before we can see a visible impact from the private sector side. Next one, please. Competition. I mean, in one of the objectives, you must have noticed that transparency, fair competition, level playing field. These are the aspects which are emphasized in our objective. But in reality, I would say that there is very little competition in arms procurement. So most of the time we buy defense equipment, at least the big ones, from single source. And of late we are buying from the US, like all your major platforms, C-130J or C-17 or even the M777 ultralight Howitzer guns, all were bought from the US companies on government to government, no competition. Similarly, what we bought from like Rafale also, that we bought from France, it was a government to government contract without any competition. S-400, on which we are spending more than $5 billion, is again a government to government contract. There is no competition. Although the DPP says competition will be promoted, but if you look at the figures, around 60 to 70% of the procurement is actually through government to government, and 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 there is very little competition, open competition among the companies, and private sector most of the time actually suffers because the public sector gets most of the big contracts on a nomination basis without any competition. So that shows that there is very little scope for competition in defense procurement. Next one, please. Controversies, I don't have to tell you. I mean, these are, if there is a small controversy in defense procurement, these are all splashed in the front pages of the newspapers. We have had enough controversies of late, starting with your VVIP helicopter controversy, then the Pilatus trainer controversy, and the biggest controversy was, of course, Rafale. Thankfully, there was some investigation, and it went up to the Supreme Court. And there was a CAG report also on Rafale contract. CAG didn't find any wrongdoing in the contracting. So also the Supreme Court. It was given a clean chit. Nonetheless, it was in the limelight because some allege that some wrongdoings have occurred, but the Supreme Court and the CAG didn't find any wrongdoing in that contract. Next one, please. Yeah. And you could ask that what is the problem in defense procurement? I mean, we are spending so much money. There is a lengthy set of procedures. There is an organization headed by the DSE, but still, why we are actually witnessing delays or allegations of corruption, and mostly delays, because that actually hurts our defense people. I mean, we can deal with the controversies. Most of the time, it is political in nature. But if there is delay, if the Indian Army or the armed forces are facing Chinese in the eastern Ladakh, I mean, there is no excuse in saying that, okay, we don't have clothing items, we don't have ammunition, or we don't have rifles. I mean, these can't be excused. So we need to have accountability fixed. Now, the problem in our procurement, so the biggest problem, I would rather say, is the diffused accountability in acquisition. There is no centralized accountability in acquisition, and we have done some studies telling the government that, unlike in other countries, in our system there is no single person who is actually responsible for procurement. Now, this graph actually tells you on the horizontal line, you see the critical stages of procurement: the qualitative requirement, the statement of case, the request for proposal, the technical evaluation committee, trials, and the contract negotiation committee. These are the major stages of procurement. And on the vertical side, you see the players who are involved. So there are so many players involved in the defense acquisition. So in some aspect, like qualitative requirements, how many players? 6 players are involved. So it is to be approved at different levels, different players who are actually administratively or bureaucratically independent. So that means if there is some problem, I mean, we can't actually fix the responsibility. Okay, so there is a problem. Who has to address the problem? So here there is no such system of single point of accountability because so many players are involved. They are all independent, and to bring them together has been a Herculean task. I would rather say it has not been sorted out completely, and this will remain a major problem even going forward. So diffuse accountability in acquisition is a major problem and leading to the delays in acquisition. Next one, please. Delays in procurement. So this is quite obvious. Normally, I was telling you earlier, it takes 2 to 3 years for the contracting time, but you can see how much time it is taken in months. 105, 113 months for procurement of simple items. Now there is an interesting case here is Doppler weather radar, which took 96 months, almost 8 years. Okay, so and interestingly, the weather department, another government department, they bought it I think in 3 to 4 months. For the ministry, same radar. and the Ministry of Defense took 8 years to buy that equipment. So that actually shows the gravity of the problem in our procurement delays. Delays are actually, as I was saying, is the biggest stumbling block in our defense preparedness. Nothing else. We have enough money, we have enough resources, we can buy equipment, but we are not able to buy in a time manner, in a time frame which is actually acceptable. Right. Next one, please. I think, yeah, so that was the first part on acquisition. So let's look at some other aspects, that is offsets. Offset is actually part of our DPP or a DAP, but most of the people, they think this is a different policy. Well, it is true to some extent, but since it is part of the DPP, part of the offset are actually the offshoot of the procurement. So we can't really distinguish whether this is a distinct policy, but nonetheless, I mean, we discuss it sometimes differently because the complexity is involved. There is some introduction, but I don't think need to be introduced the subject the way this has been depicted. But nonetheless, I would say that offsets are nothing but the reciprocities which a buyer demand from a supplier, and supplier here is a foreign supplier. Now, I'll just give a small example. Suppose we are buying a tank from a foreign company. So we are giving a $1 billion contract to a Russian company or Israel company or whatever foreign company. And since we are giving a big contract, we are losing out that money. And that if that money had been spent within the country, it would have benefited our industry, our local economy. Since we are foregoing the jobs and the revenues to our local economy, so we are trying to offset that, offset the import by asking the foreign company to give us back something. So we'll say, okay, we will buy your tank, but you give 30% of that contract to our local industry. You buy some parts, components from our local industry, so that our local industry is not 100% bypassed in that procurement. So at least 30% compensation comes to our local industry. So that is offset, is basically to offset your import and give something back to your local industry. Now this is very easy to say. Okay, we are buying a world-class defense equipment from a foreign company, and the same time also boosting our local industry. I mean, as a concept, this is very attractive, but you believe me, there is no complex subject when it comes to defense procurement. There is no more greater complex subject than offset, and so we have done some studies. Next slide, please. Yeah, next one. We have done some studies, and we, in fact, when I was in IDSA, we came out with a thorough study which was asked by the ministry at that time. In the middle, you see the defense secretary. So he was earlier Secretary Defense Production, and he asked us to prepare a report, and we gave him. And we found that the offset is very difficult to actually manage, and you need a huge manpower, a huge machinery to implement in a judicious manner. And nonetheless, so this is a very complex task, and so we gave a report. Some recommendations have been implemented by the government. Next one, please. So there is a new policy which is called Offset Guidelines 2020, which is part of the DAP. And so there is a little background. And this offset policy, the latest policy that we have, is comprehensively streamlined. In fact, it's overhauled. I mean, it won't be a mistake to say that it is completely overhauled. And there is a background to it. Why the government actually changed the offset policy de novo? Because there is an experience which actually the Ministry of Defense benefited from in changing its policy. Before the new policy came, the government had already signed some 54 contracts, some worth around $12 billion. And so government had some experience how the offsets were actually really working. And as I was saying, we did a study, and we gave the we actually told the government how the offsets whether offset has worked or not worked. Since it is a confidential study, I'm not supposed to actually divulge much. But whatever is there in the public domain, so I won't have much problem in telling that. So the finding of the study, which was actually revealed by the government to the Parliamentary Standing Committee, is like this: about 87% of the offset discharge was through the 15 Indian offset partners, IOPs. IOPs basically the Indian companies, where only top 5 companies received more than 50%, and top 10 companies received around 76%. So our offset didn't help many players. So only a few companies got benefited. The new policy has been completely revamped, and so there has been major changes. And with the changes, so there has been a doubt expressed by some people whether the ministry wants to keep its offset policy or wants to disband it completely. So my sense is that government is actually thinking that offset is not working. It's better to actually wind up the policy. And that is why you can see the threshold has been increased quite significantly. So earlier we used to ask 30% offsets if the contract was only 300 crore. Now we can't ask offsets if the contract is unless it is 2000 crore. So that means there are many contracts which is less than 2000 crore and we are importing and we can't ask offsets. So 2000 crore is around 60-70 million US dollar. But some countries like Israel, for instance, ask offsets when the contract is $5 million, whereas we are not actually, we have actually increased it to $300 million. Whereas Israel asks offsets when the contract is only $5 million. So that means, this could be a conscious policy decision by the government because the offset is not working, it's not helping the local industry. Why not? Don't ask offset in so many contracts. So only ask offset in very few contracts, only in the big contracts. And the second is offset is not applicable in government to government contracts. Earlier offset was applicable to all the imported contracts, all the import contracts. But now all the government to government contracts like S400 we recently signed with the Russia, or the Rafale contract. Rafale there is offset because that was signed before the offset guideline 2020 came into picture. But henceforth, if there is a new government to government contract, then there won't be any offsets applicable. Now I was telling you earlier that most of our 60-70% of our contracts are actually government to government. Now the 60-70% contracts won't be subject to offsets. Now, whatever 30% is left, within 2,000 crores, there won't be offsets. So, effectively, I would say that only 10% of our contracts in terms of value would be subject to offsets and 90% won't be subject to offset. So, that means we have almost given up the offset and only for token, it's there only for token manner. But unlike in the past, like every second procurement contract was subject to offsets. So those were the gone days. Next one. Yes, and this is my last slide. So this actually captures the new provisions of the new offset policy. You can see when we are asking offsets from a foreign companies, we are asking them to invest in certain areas or the avenues. So we are saying what are the avenues allowed for the foreign companies to use them to fulfill their offset obligations. So there have been some changes in the avenues. So earlier we were actually asking them, okay, you buy parts, components from local industry and fulfill your obligations. Now we are saying no, you can buy products and services only if they are major items, not any parts and components. Like if we allow a foreign company to buy parts component, they will buy screws, nut bolts, and these PCB boards, some small things. But that really doesn't really help the defense industry to grow. The idea of offset is to leverage your procurement to give a boost to the local capability. Local capability only be boosted if new technology is coming or some high-end manufacturing work is coming. It's not that if we allow them to do the same thing which they were earlier doing. So no new capability is being added. So that's why the government is actually focusing through the revised policy, through transfer of technology, through high-end manufacturing, and through promotion of exports. One area you would have noticed in Modi government's emphasis to the Make in India or Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan to promote Indian exports, and including defense export. Now, defense export has never been a priority for our government for a long time, but Modi government wants to change that, and they have actually tested little bit of success. Our export has gone up quite a bit, and now offset could be used to promote our exports further. Now we are saying, okay, through offset, if we are buying your tanks, why don't you buy some equipment from our companies? Because our companies can also manufacture few items in a very effective and cost-effective manner, efficiently. So idea is to allow the foreign companies to buy our defense equipment also. So there has been some other changes, like in the right most column, you can see multipliers. So multipliers are basically the added incentives given to the foreign companies. We are saying, like, if you give higher multiplier, let's say 4, that means if a foreign company is buying $10 worth of items, he is actually getting credit of $40 because the multiplier is 4. Now you can ask, what is the benefit of giving 4, a multiplier of 4? Now multiplier is given to certain areas which are otherwise not looked at by the foreign companies. Let's say we are asking foreign companies, Boeing, to give us a radar technology. Now radar technology is very sensitive technology. No company would easily part with that technology. But we are saying, okay, if you give us the radar technology, let's say radar technology value is $100 million, but we'll give you $400 million worth of credit. So he will think twice that for 100 million worth of items, he's getting actually $400 million worth of credit. So he may be interested to give that technology. So higher multipliers are actually given for those things. So this is a little complicated. So but if you want to read, then or you can ask me questions subsequently. But otherwise, there is enough literature written on the subject. Next slide, please. So I think this is the last one I had to discuss. And there is a chapter on offsets in the latest book that I have written, which Dr. Anand Kishore was referring to. If you want to listen more, there is a chapter on procurement and there is a chapter on offsets. So I think that gives a very good coverage of both the subjects. If you are interested, then you can have a look at it. It was really lovely, but for the disturbance, inconvenience because of the power cut, I'm extremely sorry. I hope the presentation was of some value to you. So if there is any queries, then I will be very happy to listen to. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Behra. That was an excellent lecture, though the power and other things which we don't have control over played their own role. But nevertheless, I would request my colleague, Dr. Anand, to moderate the question answer session. I think the students will be really keen to know. This is a very complex as well as very technical subject, no doubt about it. I think bureaucrats and scholars have been banging their head for a long time, and opposition is trying to nudge in every possible way. So it's not an easy subject as well. There are multiple layers to it, complications to it. There are diplomacy component of it. It's not that we are not capable and we buy many a times. There are many other factors such as to have a better tie, to have diplomacy, to keep them in loop, to make sure that there is some amount of balance of power. There are numerous ways to interpret and look at it. But as such, you might have already observed the rich content in the subject that he's been dealing with and what he has delivered to us. It's absolutely enlightening to listen to Dr. Behra. Now I would request my colleague, Dr. Anand, please take forward the question answer session.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Dr. Behra. I know that now a lot of questions have come to the minds of the students, and I could see that, yeah. First of all, let me call Kiran.
Thank you, sir, for that enlightening lecture. It covered a lot of technical aspects which otherwise would have been difficult to understand. My question is, do you think the excessive categorization and in the DPP and the continuous revision of the categories is hampering our procurement process? My second question is regarding the removal of offset banking from the offset guidelines. What is your take on that? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kiran. So I'm really delighted to look at the depth of your question. These are really interesting questions. I'm so glad that you have gone into the subjects. Well, excessive categorization, I completely agree with you. So I think we have gone little far in devising new categories without really adding any value to the procurement value to the streamlining process. I think we have also written on this that some of the categories can easily be clubbed, like the strategic partnership, buy and make India, they can be clubbed, and buy Indian and buy and make Indian. Sorry, buy Indian IDDM and buy Indian. Those could be clubbed because the objective is same, to promote Indian industry. So there could be greater incentive if a local company is offering more indigenous content. That could be devised. So I won't say it is hampering the procurement per se, but it unnecessarily dilutes the seriousness, especially among the analysts, I would say. But I think the industry, they know it very well because they read each and every para and line of the procedures, and they thoroughly know what is expected from each and every category. But I think there is no harm in simplifying and making it 2-3 categories. The objective is whether we are actually importing or making, buy or make. Buy largely refers to import or make. So these are the two fundamental categories, buy and make. So we can have another buy and make, then we are buying something and then license manufacturing. This could be third one, which we used to have for a long time. So I think we could limit it to 3 categories. Offset banking, yes. Offset banking is very tricky. In fact, we have written that banking could be of 2 types. One is your pre-banking and is post-banking. Post-banking is okay. You are supposed to give offset $30 million. You have actually given 40. So $10 million can be saved, which can be used in the future, subject to a timeline. But pre-banking, if you allow, in which areas? So if you unless you are defined areas, then it could be tricky. Like I can give you an example. HCL was actually exporting these aircraft doors to some European companies for a long time. Now the same foreign company, what is doing is actually showing those procurements and banking it. So that banking is not leading to new business. The same business which is happening irrespective of offsets are being used to get credits. So I think the government understood the problem, and that's why it is disbanded. So I'm not very unhappy with this. So in fact, we were suggesting that offset banking, at least the pre-banking, should be disbanded with, because what the foreign companies are doing, they're actually doing the same thing which they were earlier doing. It is before the offset policy came. So they were not adding any new business to our local companies. So I think it was a good measure to disband with the offset banking provision. I hope this addressed your queries.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question by Srikutan.
Thank you, sir, for the lecture. It was like really wonderful listening to you. And this is one area that I haven't heard much discussion about. And this is indeed a very important area. So I have a few questions for you. So beginning with the procurement budget that you showed. So Navy is shown as having 32,000 crores allotted compared to Air Force, which has got around 48. So why is it that the Navy is still being seen below the other force? Because one of the main threats we have is from China in the maritime domain. So through the Belt and Road Initiative. So doesn't Navy deserve more? So, and that is the first question. The second question is regarding the balance between R&D and production, defense production in India. So how is India faring when like coming to like handling that, the balance between R&D, the defense and research and defense, no, yeah, and production. And thirdly, is there a lack of interest from the part of government in terms of like bringing in private players? Because you also mentioned how there was a like deficiency in terms of competition. So if we look at US, how they managed to bring in like sensitive technology like the stealth aircraft, there were like case of F-35 like recently, how Boeing and the other players tried to like bring in that. Such kind of a competition was not seen in India. So is that part of something that's within the corporate sector, or is it from the due to the act of the governments, successive governments over the years? And third one, sorry, last one is regarding the red tapeism as a major problem in the country. So how much is it affecting the like we saw that how delays are happening, and why is it that such a like act is coming from the part of civil servants? And is it good to include military officers for defense procurements more in terms of like administrative matters, or is it still good to like continue with the civil servant officers, civil servant officers? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Srikutam, for asking such in-depth queries. I'm glad that you also take much interest in the subject. Well, on your first question, the distribution of capital budget among the three services, Army, Navy, and Air Force, it's not that the government actually is arbitrary in giving allocation in certain manner. It depends on the size of the service and the requirements. So historically, the Navy has been the smallest service, and so as you know, till 71 war, Navy had no role to play in India's defense because all our threats were coming from land. We primarily had land-centric and air-centric to some extent. Air-centric with Pakistan, even the Air Force was not used in 1962 war. Okay, so and our fight were largely restricted to land wars, and so that's why there was not enough focus on the Navy, of course. And in fact, if you look at, I have written a chapter on this. Mapping India's defense the distribution of defense budget, Army, Navy, Air Force since 1947. That is available in some in book chapter. So I found one interesting aspect that once upon a time the Navy used to have only 4% of the defense budget. Now that has gone up to 16 or 17% right now. So Navy as a whole gets 16 to 17% of the defense budget, but in capital procurement you see you were mentioning 30%. So Navy is still a capital intensive service, but since it is the smallest service, so obviously this is reflected in how much money is actually, in numerical sense, how much money goes to the Navy. Okay, like in Air Force. Air Force, if you look at some 2 lakh people or maybe less than that compared to 12-13 lakh of Army, but Air Force is the most capital intensive service. In fact, it spends more on capital than others. It's because the capital is the nature of the service. If you buy one Rafale, it is 1800 crore. Within 1800 crore, you can buy 300 tanks. So we are talking about different platforms and the nature of platforms. So that is the reason. Balancing R&D and production, yes, balancing. Yes, there are R&D agencies, there are production agencies in India. Like your DRDO is primarily the R&D agency, production, your PSUs, ordnance factories, private sector, there are the production agencies. Now, balancing in terms of what? Whether you want to distribute your R&D budget between industry and DRDO, or I mean, if that is the reference. But historically, we have devised a different system that R&D budget goes to largely to the DRDO. DRDO is supposed to manufacture, design, and come out with the new technologies. Those technologies would actually pass on to the production agencies, DPSUs, OOB, now the private sector also, for the production. But that has actually not helped. And the barrier between R&D and production has actually not helped. If you look at other countries, R&D is very much part of the production. You have niche R&D labs within certain universities or labs others, but unlike in India, no other country has such elaborate R&D setup and then totally cut off from the production. So to me, actually, the R&D should actually move to the industry, so that the time between technology development to production is actually bridged. So that balance has actually to be maintained, but I think we have actually grown so big players, be it PSUs or the R&D or in the private sector. Now you see the difficulty in corporatizing the ordnance factory board. The government is quite serious to corporatize, but there is a lot of resistance. So when the institutions become big and old, then their ability to resist successful reforms also increases. So that one has to actually factor in. Private sector, yes. I mean, successive governments, especially since 2001, are actually trying to incentivize the private sector, bring the private sector in defense production. But there are practical difficulties to for the private sector to get into defense production because of the legacy issues. Historically, we have been actually dealing with the government companies. Now, to change suddenly to the private sector, it takes time. And another problem is that in the private sector, everybody is suspicious. If government is doing business with the government company, nobody is bothered. Even if instead of 3 rupees, you give 5 rupees to a government companies, the CAG, CBC, they won't question you anything. But instead of 3 rupees, if you give 3.1 rupee to a private sector, then it becomes a scandal. So our appetite to deal with the private sector has not actually matured enough. So that actually partly shows why the private sector is not getting more business than it should actually do. Red tapeism is there. Red tapeism is not simply within the civilian bureaucracy, it is also there in the military bureaucracy. It is a misnomer that the civilians are actually trying to derail the equipment. It's not the impact. In fact, we have marginalized the civilian bureaucracy in our defense procurement system. There is a paper we have written, it's available in Google also. US defense acquisition system lessons for India. There is a paper on French defense acquisition system lessons for India. So you can see how they have actually manned their acquisition machinery institutions. So the only difference is that they have the trained and thorough professionals doing acquisition. Here, neither in the military, in the military, not every military guy is an expert on equipment. If you are an infantry soldier, how do you know that okay, artillery gun, how it should behave, what should be its technology? You are not the god, not just because you are in the military. Similarly, you are not a fool if you are in the civil bureaucracy. So, I mean, the knowledge comes with the exposure to the professionalism. If you are not trained, you know the subject because you are reading, because you are participating in forums. But if I ask you, okay, you give me a lecture on nuclear science, nuclear missiles, obviously you will have difficulty. But if you are exposed to that after a few years, you will gain some experience. The problem is that in our system, nobody is a permanent staff to deal with the acquisition. Here, everybody changes 3 to 5 years time. Obviously, and these are so complex subject, very difficult for the generalist to deal with. I'll just give you one example. When the Boeing comes for negotiation to the Indian Ministry of Defense, Boeing gets the best lawyer or the best your contract manager from their system, who knows how the negotiation is taken place, how the pricing is arrived at, how the legal issues are to be tackled. And here we are having people. Just before yesterday, he might be in the Ministry of Child and Welfare Department, and next day he's in the Ministry of Defense. Just because you're in the Ministry of Defense, it doesn't mean that you know the contract issue thoroughly. So that is why people tend to delay. So if you or I would be there, and if you are given a $1 billion contract to sign and some 600 pages, and 90% of the pages you can't understand what is there, so obviously you won't take your pen and sign, because if you sign, then the rest of your career somebody will be knocking at your door, CBC, CBI, all the C's. So that's why that is the red tapeism. People are also genuinely concerned about taking decision because of the lack of knowledge on the subject. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vera, for answering those questions. I think we have a few more questions. I hope you will be able to take them.
Yeah.
Okay, Shishiraj.
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you, sir, for that enriching lecture. It was really different from what I have been reading so far. So I have a host of questions, so I will ask. So first of all, there is this problem of faulty formulation of ASQR, which is the main source for all the delays and everything, which is like always cited. So how do you see that? And then there is this problem of single vendor situation versus competitive process. Like DPP always envisages that there should be a acquisition through competitive bidding process. But every time we end up in a single vendor situation. So how do you see that? Then we have this problem of technical bid and commercial bid. So every time when we do our technical bid and commercial bid is never fall in line with what the vendor presents to us. Like either our bid is too high or too low, or either our technical bid is too different from what the vendor is offering. So there is always this mismatch. Then again, sir, how do you really secure the adherence by armed forces to DAP, as it has been evident from the past procurement that the principles of DPP were not followed in letter and spirit? That is evident in every deal, whether it is MMRC or Chinook helicopter. So DPP was never followed. Then again, sir, there is this problem that our armed forces never maintain vendor database. So they don't have ideas about the details of the equipment that they want. It has been found that they simply copy these details from whatever the information is available in public domain. So how do you formulate a really great ASQR? Then again, sir, how feasible is the leasing system in long term?
How feasible
is the leasing system, that new leasing system that we are leasing equipment?
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
And then,
yeah,
sir, one or two more questions, sir.
Yeah, please.
Then there is a thing that we use price escalation factor, and which is completely out of sync. Like we use 5% price escalation factor for Russia and 3.5% for European companies, but the actual increase in these prices are 1.35%. These are, I am quoting from the CAG report. So how do you see that this is completely out of sync? And then finally, sir, our main goal is to buy from a vendor which offers us lowest price technically acceptable bid. So L1 vendor, and we are not looking at technology, but we are giving primacy to the lowest bidder. So how do you see that? These are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Shishiraj. So again, so I am very glad that you have great insights on the subject. So, and that is quite reflected from your queries, like from the likewise of the previous two participants. So, well, I'm very happy that you have listed on all your concerns. I'll try to answer on all of them. I'll try my best. Well, keywords, I think I have written a number of places about the problems in the keywords. In fact, the book that I showed you here has a chapter on procurement, and there is one section devoted to keywords of problems. So if you want, then you can have a look at it. That actually maps down all the keyword related concerns from very beginning, starting with the Bofors contract till the Rafale contract. So we could understand what is the problem and how to actually sort out. Most of the problem is that we don't have a professional acquisition agency. Okay, so professional acquisition agency where people are trained to do their work. So here I was also referring to the previous question. So here people come from different ministries, even within the armed forces also. They come from different arms, and all of a sudden you are supposed to write a keyword. So what do? You just go to the internet or JANS and then copy and paste and then put a keyword. Obviously, whatever is quoted in the GEMS, very few companies can actually really manufacture. But since it is part of your tender, then it leads to subsequent problems. So my limited answer to your question is that lack of professionalism, lack of training is what leading to the QR related problems. Single vendor, obviously this is also related to single vendor. If you want a tank which actually I mean, there is a big cartoon I used to actually show it in some of my presentations, that a tank which can actually run, which can actually go underwater and can fly. That is the kind of keyword. It is exaggeration, but that is the same. I mean, it conveys the same message that you want something which nobody can manufacture, or sometimes only one vendor who can manufacture. Right. So it all depends how you specify your query. Suppose you want to buy a refrigerator. If you are pre-decided, okay, you want a Samsung refrigerator, a 3-door, 4-door, whatever, then go with that pre-notion. Then obviously no other refrigerator will meet your requirement. But if you go with a open mind, I need a refrigerator to store my stuffs. I need a deep refrigeration for ice, some to keep and enough space for vegetables. Probably will have some choice. So that is the problem. So it all depends on how you frame your keywords, and that can also lead to single vendor and multiple vendor. Sometimes when I used to look at this subject long time ago, I asked one senior official, who is no more unfortunately, died in COVID. He said, Lakshman, our system is smart enough to eliminate competition. I was surprised to hear that coming from a very senior official, but he said that our tendency is to eliminate competition for variety of reasons. So I'm not going into the details what are the reasons, but just want to convey you that other factors also come into picture why we eliminate so many other players and just happy with the single vendor. Technical commercial bid, yeah. So I think you are referring to the CAG report. So the vendors, yeah, are not actually submitting the bids as per our RFP, and probably they know that they can take us for granted. Otherwise, what could be the such lapse on their part? If you are strict, if we are strict that okay, if you don't submit your bids as per our requirement, you will be disqualified, and we remain strict on that, then they will take us for granted. DAP letter and spirit, it all depends on the leadership. So I think for a long time the self-reliance aspect was not given enough importance by the armed forces, I would say. But after the Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, and after certain changes in the Ministry of Defense, your DMA and CTS, so this self-reliance aspect is given little more respect, I would rather say. Earlier, all indigenous was useless, all imported are good. Those were the mindset. But I think that is changing, but it all depends on the leadership. If the leadership is strict, saying that okay, nothing doing, I want only the domestic items, then everybody will fall in place. So I think they will follow or not follow depends on what kind of leadership we have. Vendor database, you are absolutely right. That also is a problem because we don't have a thorough professional organization. We don't have a professional organization like your DES or DGA, DGA of France or DS of UK. We have been there, and they have massive organization. They have in-house people doing procurement 24/7 throughout their life, and they have database. They know if a new technology is coming, what would be the extra price. They are maintaining database for the last 60 70 years. In the US, we found that no vendor cannot take their government for granted. If they quote some exorbitant prices, the government knows that okay, what would be the precise, not precise price, what is the approximate price, because of their database. In the France is the best example, best professional organization I have ever seen. In there, even the vendors don't care about the price. They know that their government will give them the right price. Even they sometimes they quote less, but their government says, okay, you have quoted less, you will not make your enough profit. This should be the right price. The France is just opposite. So that is a trust level professionalism. So we are talking about leasing. Leasing. I have written about this recently. Leasing is a short-term measure. You could buy lease. You could lease some equipment for the time being, but it should not be a backdoor entry for import, and leasing not necessarily cost effective over the period of time. So those aspects need to be emphasized. Escalation factor, you are absolutely right. So we don't have a good financial managers to actually advise the government. Although we have cost advisor, but I don't think they know what is LIBOR rate, what is international rate. So there we can't actually have two opinions. I'm absolutely with you. We need thorough professionals who know these aspects very clearly. Lowest L1 vendor is a misnomer. Even other countries are following L1 vendor. L1 vendor doesn't mean that you will buy short stops, because see, you have specified your requirement. Only those who have met, those who are able to meet those requirements, then you are opening their price feed. It's not that there is a screening stage, na? So first cutoff is your technical cutoff. If you are, suppose you want a laptop, it's not that you buy 5,000, even there are laptops 10,000 rupees you can buy, but you don't buy, na? First you meet, okay, I need these specifications. Beyond that, whoever is meeting, then I will take the lowest one, the one with the lowest price. So you are not compromising your technical requirements. So this is a misnomer that, okay, L1, before that, nobody is stopping you from screening. In fact, there is a step, a mandatory step to screen for your technical competency. Only those who have competency, then their price bid you are opening. So it, of course, the DAP 260 has allowed L1 T1, but it's very difficult, and we are shouting from the roof all the while, okay, you allow us L1 T1. The government is allowed, but the people are not using it. They know that if they use it, they will be caught in a trap. I hope that addresses your query. So I have some other engagement. If you don't mind, then.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, Dr. Vera. I think it was really great having you here, and I think all of our students will definitely agree with me. And I think we should have more of these kind of meetings, and hope to see you soon physically in Manipal. But before we say goodbye, I would like to ask Srikutan to give a formal vote of thanks to your lecture. Srikutan?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So hi everyone. I'm Srikutan. I'm from the first year, second semester batch. So it is my pleasure to first of all thank Dr. Bera, who has given us a wonderful lecture. Something that is unique, that we don't find much discussed about, but still is a very important part of the national security architecture. So he has been speaking about the need for defense procurement, the procedures for it, the objectives and details regarding the design, production, procurement stages, and how the lion's share of all the procurement goes with the foreign actors. And also, like we discussed the delays and something very important called as the India's defense offset policy. So this are some of the terms that is very new to me. And I'm sure like many of you will have benefited immensely. So thank you very much, sir, for taking time from your pressure, like very busy schedule, and spending like 2 hours with us. And yeah, there have been some technical glitches, but we have enjoyed thoroughly and we have learned so much. So thank you very much. And secondly, as a student, this has been very like important to us, all of us. So we have this course called National Security, India's National Security and Defense Management. So this is something which will be beneficial for us, not only in terms of the course, but also in the future like stages, because many of us have this course or this as an area of interest. So this is very like beneficial to us. And also, I'd like to thank Nandkishore sir, who has arranged this, and he's our HOD, and then Anand sir, who has been the coordinator who designed the poster. Thank you, sirs. And I'd like to thank all the faculty as well. Moni sir was present, Dhanasri ma'am, Devi sir. And also, I'd like to thank all my classmates and colleagues. So I'm sure like many of you raised wonderful questions and have benefited immensely. So kudos to you too. And also I'd like to thank all those from who have participated from outside. We found a number of people. So thank you for showing interest, and thank you on the from the part of Mahe. And also we are looking forward to hosting lectures like this from you, sir. And also we'd like to encourage everyone to join us further. We have a lecture this afternoon at 1. So if you can make it, it'll be great. So thank you everyone once again. Wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for coming.